Okay, we're going to talk about danger zones next. The danger zone on the bus is the circumference all the way around the bus that's 12 feet out. So I'm going to let you watch this video regarding danger zones and we'll discuss it after.
It's a nightmarish moment. This is video of a first grader dangling from the school bus after her backpack was caught in the doors. The Kentucky bus driver has no idea that the 7-year-old is trapped. Thank goodness she survived. Incredibly, Inside Edition has found 31 incidents, including 2 deaths of kids dragged by their school buses. Just how strong are those doors? They trapped and crushed just about everything we tried to put between them. This can of soda literally exploded from the pressure. With their parents' permission and under the supervision of the experts, we loaded up the bus with a bunch of noisy kids. Then we carefully closed the school bus doors on the backpack of 8-year-old Julia. Aboard the bus, you can hardly hear her. Imagine if this was your child. For more information about school bus dangers, watch Inside Edition.
Okay, so as you can see, danger zones really are a problem in the country. It could happen here if we turn a blind eye and say, oh, that could never happen to me, that would never happen to me. Guess who that's going to happen to? It's when you become complacent and really believe that something isn't going to happen is when it does happen. So really be aware of your danger zones. It's that 12 feet all the way around your bus, and that's why the loading zones are so, the policies are so important to follow those safety policies in the loading zones at the schools, because that's where most of our kids are. You know, you have 30 or 40, 50 kids on your bus, but around the danger zone at your school, you could have hundreds. So just really be aware and be cautious of those danger zones.
You probably think you know your job and what to expect on a day-to-day basis. Everyone's happy, no one ever gets hurt, and you never have to deal with crises or, heaven forbid, life-threatening emergencies. So you must be asking yourself, what's all this fuss about bloodborne pathogens? Or you may be saying, what the heck does that have to do with my job? Well, no matter how well your day is going or how well you do your job, accidents can happen and people sometimes get sick. And that's when you may be at risk for exposure to bloodborne pathogens. This course will teach you how to protect yourself against exposure and what to do in case you do become exposed. The first step in protecting yourself from exposure to bloodborne pathogens is to know what they are. Bloodborne pathogens are microorganisms that can cause some pretty serious diseases. Diseases like HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, and hepatitis. Bloodborne pathogens live in a person's blood and in certain bodily fluids, such as semen and vaginal secretions, amniotic fluid in pregnant women, and any bodily fluid or body part that's visibly contaminated with blood or bodily fluids. We hope you won't have to worry about most of those, but you definitely have to be aware of any exposure to blood or vomit. So let's learn about some diseases you can get from bloodborne pathogens. There are hundreds of diseases that can live and grow in a person's bloodstream. These range from the common cold to venereal disease to the bubonic plague. Obviously, some are more dangerous than others. We're going to focus on a couple of very dangerous bloodborne pathogens that you could possibly be exposed to as a bus driver: HIV/AIDS and a few different strains of hepatitis. AIDS stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, an incurable disease that's caused by the HIV virus. HIV/AIDS has no discernible symptoms in its early stages. As the disease progresses, symptoms intensify and an infected person becomes weak and incapacitated. HIV/AIDS eventually causes death. There are no vaccines currently available to make you immune to HIV. However, there are drugs that can prolong and improve an infected person's life. Everyone has heard of AIDS through movies, television, and newspapers, and many people are afraid of the disease because they don't know enough about it. But this fear is irrational because you can't accidentally pick up AIDS. You can't get it by using a public phone or bathroom, or by sitting next to an AIDS patient on a bus. You can only be infected with the HIV virus by coming into direct contact with the blood or body fluids of an infected person through a point of entry on your body, such as your eyes, nose, mouth, or throat, or other mucous membranes, open wounds, or through intimate sexual contact with an infected person. A mucous membrane is the moist skin that lines your eyes, nose, mouth, and throat. Hepatitis is an inflammation of the liver. There are 3 strains of hepatitis, A, B, and C. Depending upon the strain, the disease can be mild and brief, or it can be long-term and even fatal. The most common is hepatitis B, which is called HBV. HBV can develop into chronic liver disease, cirrhosis, or liver cancer if not properly treated. Just like AIDS, hepatitis B has no symptoms during the early stages. It's transmitted by direct contact with blood or bodily fluids. But unlike the HIV virus, it can also be transmitted by some types of casual contact, such as kissing, because hepatitis B can be found in someone's saliva. There is a vaccine to prevent hepatitis B, and treatment is available if you're exposed to the disease. Hepatitis A is a mild form of the disease. It can be transmitted through contaminated feces and occasionally by syringes and emergency equipment that have been contaminated. But the good news is there's a vaccine to prevent hepatitis A and a treatment that works if you're exposed. Unfortunately, you won't do so well with hepatitis C. It's the deadliest of the 3 strains. About half the people infected go on to get chronic liver disease, and some of them even get cirrhosis and liver cancer. Hepatitis C can be transmitted by contact with blood and some bodily fluids, but not by saliva. There is no vaccine or cure for hepatitis C at this time. Let's do a quick review. Exposure happens when you come into direct contact with the blood or other potentially infectious fluids of an infected person. But remember, exposure is not infection. You can only become infected if your bodily fluids mix with the infected person's bodily fluids. That means that their fluids have to come in contact with your eyes, nose, mouth, other mucous membranes or open wounds, or you have to have intimate sexual contact with an infected person. So, how do you avoid something you can't see? The answer is universal precautions. Universal precautions simply means you automatically assume every drop of blood or other potentially infectious material is definitely infected. So you protect yourself no matter what the situation. Imagine this. A passenger falls on your bus and gets a cut. Now, what should you do in this situation? Should you clean the wound with your bare hands? Absolutely not. In this situation, do not touch the passenger. Direct the other passengers to move away from the injured person and call for help. The paramedics will provide the right kind of care to the passenger and will also clean up any mess left behind. As soon as you complete your shift, report the incident so that the bus can be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected. If you are directly exposed, don't panic. Remain calm and report the incident to your supervisor. Provide as much detail as possible when reporting the exposure, such as the passenger's name, address, how the incident occurred, who else was involved, etc. Follow the instructions your supervisor gives you. We don't want to frighten you, but bloodborne pathogens are serious business. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask your supervisor. Welcome. This hazard communication course is designed to make sure you know about the hazardous materials in your facilities, have access to information about them, and most importantly, learn how to safely work with them. There are a few hazardous materials in the workplace, and as a driver, you might come face to face with them. When you do, you'll need to know how to protect yourself. The first step in safeguarding yourself is to be able to identify hazardous materials in the first place. You should also know whether an agent poses a physical risk or a health risk. Physical hazards, sometimes called safety hazards, are things that can immediately injure you or damage the things around you. They include combustible and flammable liquids, battery acid, compressed gases, and some cleaning agents. Health hazards are chemicals that can affect or damage your health. A health hazard could show up as a simple skin rash, or you could develop cancer or anything in between. Health hazards can be acute, meaning that you can have an immediate reaction, or chronic, meaning the symptoms may slowly come on over time. Health hazards are usually harder to identify than physical hazards. For example, if something blows up, it's pretty hard to miss the explosion. But health hazards can hurt you without you knowing it, so you don't always notice them as they happen. Some of the most common hazards found in a typical bus garage and yard include combustible and flammable liquids, corrosives, irritants. Let's start with combustibles. Diesel fuel is the most common hazardous material at a bus yard. It's combustible, and when it's exposed to very high temperatures, it can catch on fire. It also poses a health risk with prolonged exposure. Corrosive materials can be found in the battery of your bus and in some cleaning agents. They can eat away at metal, clothing, and even your skin if you come into direct contact with them. Irritants cause rashes, hives, and redness, or an itching or burning sensation. They're sometimes found in cleaning products and in the dry powder released from a fire extinguisher. Here's the good news. When you get away from an irritant, the irritation goes away too. So as we said, there aren't a lot of chemical risks, but the few that do exist pose a hazard to your safety and health. Let's take a moment to review. Hazardous materials need to be identified, but how? Ah yes, labels. Labels help you identify the hazardous material and the dangers it presents. Manufacturers are required by law to put warning labels on all hazardous products. A warning label must include the following information: name and address of the manufacturer, identity of the hazardous material or materials used in a product. This could be either the chemical name, trade name, or common name. A warning word, such as corrosive or toxic, that describes the material's hazard. Some labels also include a statement of hazards that could be encountered when handling or using the chemical. Brief descriptions of what can be done to avoid the hazard. There are even labels that include instructions to follow in case of contact or exposure. However, most do not. You see, labels are designed to give you a quick overview of the basic information you need to protect yourself. All hazardous chemicals must be clearly labeled. Because of the regulations, all hazardous materials should arrive at your location already labeled. But remember, the label only gives you a little information, usually enough to know to stay clear. MSDS. What does that spell? Materials Safety Data Sheet. Every hazardous material comes with an MSDS, which contains lots of information. Chemical manufacturers are required to provide detailed information about hazardous chemicals on a Material Safety Data Sheet, the MSDS. An MSDS must be delivered along with any hazardous material. The MSDS provides information about a chemical's composition, physical characteristics, and toxicity. Material safety data sheets must be updated whenever a hazardous chemical changes or any new information is discovered about it. Copies of MSDSs for all hazardous substances used in your workplace should be filed in one central location. Always read over the MSDS for a particular material before using it. If you have any questions about any hazardous material you will be using, ask your supervisor. And know where the MSDSs are stored in your facility. When you need information that can't be found on the label, you'll find it on the MSDS. Now, a bottle of Pine Sol or a can of spray paint doesn't come with an MSDS. This type of packaging for consumers' use is considered too small. Although every MSDS for every chemical has all the information you will need, there is no standardized format for presenting it. In other words, every chemical manufacturer does their own thing. Some MSDS forms have 5 sections, some have 9, and they may identify the sections by different titles. For our purposes, an MSDS has 6 basic sections. They are identification, ingredients and characteristics, physical hazards, health hazards, spill and leak procedures, and special precautions. You can protect yourself by being careful around hazardous chemicals and by wearing personal protective equipment, otherwise known as PPE. For most substances you might encounter, such as diesel fuel or windshield washer fluid, PPE is simply not necessary. It would only be required if there were prolonged exposure. But most importantly, just be careful. Remember, liquids can splash up into your face. Never smoke around any chemicals in the shop or while fueling. If you get something on you like diesel fuel or motor oil, wash it off immediately. If you have a spill or just see a spill, report it to your supervisor immediately. Fortunately, you don't have to handle many chemicals or hazardous substances as a bus driver. But when you do, be sure to take the necessary precautions to ensure your safety, as well as those around you. Let's review. There are a few hazardous materials in our industry. They can pose a physical risk, such as fire or explosion, or they can pose a health risk, such as skin rashes, or through excessive and prolonged exposure, even cancer. All hazardous materials must be labeled. Labels help you identify the type of hazard you may be dealing with. For every hazardous material, there is a Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS. It has all of the information you'll need for handling the substance safely. You can protect yourself by using extra caution when dealing with hazardous chemicals, and by wearing personal protective equipment when it is required. Please follow these safety precautions. If you have any questions about this subject, ask your supervisor. Thank you for paying attention to this important OSHA topic, hazards communication. This course on Lockout Tag Out procedures will help you understand the dangers associated with machinery and equipment, which of course includes buses, that all have the potential to release stored energy which could hurt you. Lockout Tag Out procedures are designed to prevent accidents from happening. OSHA regulates Lockout Tag Out procedures through the Control of Hazardous Energy Standard, found at 29 CFR 1910.147. This standard requires training, audits, and record keeping to ensure that workers will not be injured by unintentionally energized equipment. Lockout Tag Out procedures must be followed at all times at all facilities. But first, you have to understand what could happen and how you can prevent it. Lockout Tag Out procedures are designed to prevent accidents from happening when machinery is being repaired or serviced. To prevent injury, an appropriate lock is affixed to prevent the release of energy, or a tag is placed in a way that warns anyone that there is a potential for an unwanted release of energy that could result in injury. As a bus driver, the only machinery you should come in contact with is your bus. It can become a hazard to you or others when it's being worked on. The goal of Lockout Tag Out is to prevent a machine, such as a bus, from being started while someone is working on it. The Lockout Tag Out standard covers 2 groups of employees, authorized and affected. An authorized employee is almost always the technician or maintenance employee. In other words, the authorized person is the employee who is authorized to work on equipment. Just about everyone else is an affected employee. That means the operators and drivers, but it could also mean another maintenance employee, a supervisor, or a manager. Authorized employees are responsible for following very specific lockout tag out procedures before working on any machinery. Affected employees are responsible for knowing how to identify a piece of machinery that must not be touched and to leave it alone. As a driver, you're responsible for conducting a daily pre-trip inspection of your bus before you drive it. During the inspection, look for defects that can compromise safety. Different state regulations identify different aspects of the bus as safety-related, but some requirements apply to all buses everywhere, things like tires, brakes, and lights. If you identify a safety-related problem during a pre-trip inspection, notify your supervisor or the maintenance shop so that the repairs can be made. Never drive a bus with safety-related defects. Stop now and discuss the specific safety-related out-of-service criteria at your location. Once you notify the shop that a bus has a safety-related defect, the technician will put it out of service before making any repairs. Before beginning any repairs or maintenance on a bus, or any other piece of equipment that could have stored energy, the technician will affix his or her lock like this to prevent anyone from trying to start it. All employees working in an area requiring lockout tag out procedures must be trained to recognize lockout tag out devices and the importance of not disturbing or removing them unless authorized. Use locks or tags to isolate energy or to prevent the accidental startup of a bus. Training will be given whenever there is a change in job assignments, a change in machinery or equipment, or a procedural change. Lockout tag out procedures are designed to prevent accidents from happening. Please follow lockout tag out procedures at all times at your facility. Never attempt to start, move, or operate a bus that is locked or tagged out for repairs or maintenance. Thank you for your attention during this course.